Under the ruthless leadership of Luciano Leggio, the Corleone Mafia morphed from a status quo enforcer into a fearsome, expansionist power. Shattering the old mafia's rules, they dismantled the long-standing families of Palermo with unprecedented audacity and brutality. Bernardo Provenzano and Toto Riina shattered Palermo's old order. But as Riina descended into madness, Provenzano, known as il ragioniere or the accountant, remained the cautious strategist. From the shadows he forged alliances and counseled prudence. When the violence threatened to destroy Cosa Nostra, Provenzano stepped into the light, seizing control. He became head of the Sicilian Mafia not because he was the last godfather left standing, but because he was the only one capable of forging the new Cosa Nostra, adapting it to the demands of the time. As an elusive fugitive, he reshaped the Mafia's destiny, forever altering the landscape of La Cosa Nostra. Bernardo Provenzano, also known as Binnu, was born on January 31, 1933. His parents, Angelo Provenzano and Giovanna Rigoglioso, were a poor peasant couple from Corleone, Sicily. He was the third of 7 siblings. During that time, peasant laborers would gather at dawn, waiting to be called for work by the powerful farm managers. A day's hard labor in the fields barely earned enough to feed their large family, often leaving the household hungry. Bernardo left school after just 2 years, with limited literacy, and began working in the fields with his father. While most boys his age continued their education for a few more years, Bernardo had to rely on his wits by the age of 7. His father died in 1958, by which time Bernardo was already part of an infamous armed gang. His sisters, Rosa, Maria, and Michele, had married local boys, but his brothers still lived at home. His mother, who took care of pressing and starching their shirts, often didn't know where they were. Bernardo would come home in the early evening for supper, then head out again. His mother worried a lot about the company he kept, but at least he came home at night. However, soon he would have to go into hiding, and for the rest of her life she would only see him briefly during secret visits. The same year as his father's death, 4 horsemen rode across a farm near Corleone and approached one of the barns. They crept inside carrying axes and shovels, then smashed the wine barrels. The raiders worked for Luciano Leggio, a notorious peasant upstart and cattle rustler. They wanted to seize the farm and were determined to drive the farmer off his land. The local peasant workers were threatened with death if they attempted to harvest the land. Eventually, the farmer and a few hired hands went out before dawn, working in fear and haste. However, no one dared to thresh the corn, so it lay where it had been cut until Leggio's men arrived with their trucks, loaded it up, and drove it away. One night, the gang turned up at the farm store with a truck. They held the guard hostage with his own hunting rifle while they loaded 70 barrels of pecorino cheese onto the truck, stealing the rifle as well. When the farmer had nothing left to lose, he finally called the police. The thieves, all well known in the local community, were rounded up and taken to the station. At the age of 25, Bernardo Provenzano received his first criminal charge for stealing cheese. Other key members of Leggio's gang included Giuseppe Rufino, Calogero Bugarella, as well as Giovanni Pasqua, Leggio's childhood friend and close ally. Later, they were joined by others, notably Bugarella's younger brother Leoluca and Salvatore Toto Riina. This marked the beginning of Bernardo's deep involvement with Leggio's criminal operations. As a loyal member, Bernardo would continue to climb the ranks of the mafia, learning the ruthless tactics and strategic thinking that would one day make him a formidable leader in his own right. Like many young men who would later become mafiosi, Leggio started his career as an estate guard, protecting the wealth of absentee landlords. In 1948, he murdered the young trade union activist Placido Rizzotto, who was leading a campaign for peasants' land rights. However, Rizzotto's remains would not be discovered until July 7, 2009. This cold-blooded murder elevated Leggio's status. Bernardo was 15 at the time and had already been working among the peasants for over half his childhood. He admired Leggio's ruthless efficiency in handling the situation while evading consequences. Another significant influence on young Bernardo was Dr. Michele Navarra, the mafia boss of Corleone. An educated man from a middle-class background, Navarra was well connected in politics and industry, wielding substantial power in the region. In Corleone, he was known as Padre Nostro, or Our Father. He had many political connections. However, he was not hesitant to switch allegiances if it benefited him, a lesson that Bernardo took to heart. When Navarra received numerous petitions from farm owners begging him to stop Leggio's gang's nightly raids, he ordered him to cease stealing cattle. In response, Leggio forced landowners to sell their land to him and started a cattle ranch stocked mostly with stolen livestock. These stolen ranches were managed by Bernardo, Totorina, and others. They transported the illegally butchered meat to the market in Palermo, with Bernardo riding shotgun on the trucks. Impressed by Bernardo's calm efficiency with a pistol, Leggio made him his top hitman. Bernardo and Totorina effectively became Leggio's lieutenants and bodyguards. Determined to challenge Navarra and the Palermo Mafia, Leggio found his opportunity with water. The Mafia controlled the water supply to Palermo's lemon and mandarin groves. A proposal to build a dam to supply Palermo threatened this control, and Leggio was determined to gain influence over the project. The dam became a key issue in an upcoming election, so Leggio sent out his young thugs with leaflets supporting the pro-dam candidate. Navarra opposed the dam because it would flood land belonging to his friends, and also disrupt the Mafia control of the water supply. He backed the Christian Democrat candidate who opposed the dam. To ensure victory, hundreds of Corleonesi reportedly went blind on election day, allowing Navarra to accompany them into the polling booth to ensure they voted for his candidate. The Christian Democrats won comfortably, infuriating Leggio. The tension between Leggio and Navarra escalated into a violent feud, resulting in over 50 murders, 22 attempted murders, and numerous disappearances devastating a generation of Corleonesi. In 1958, Leggio set up an ambush for Navarra. As Navarra drove by with another doctor, they were forced off the road and gunned down in a hail of bullets, killing both men. In September 1963, Bernardo Provenzano was involved in the killing of 3 members of a rival gang. As they lay dying, Provenzano approached each one and finished them off with a bullet to the head. In another incident, he reportedly beat a rival to death with a stone. However, it was the murder on September 10, 1963, that drastically altered his life and forced him into hiding. He had killed Francesco Streva, another member of Michele Navarra's faction. Unlike usual practices, the grieving relatives of the victims took the courageous step of reporting the murders to the police, which was particularly bold in a close-knit community like theirs. This act of defiance fueled public outrage, especially against Luciano Leggio's gang, and specifically targeted Provenzano. Up until then, the police response to the Corleone Mafia's activities had been subdued. Leggio, already a notorious criminal, had merely received a polite request from the police to live honestly, respect persons and property, and observe the law. However, the murders of Streva and his men provoked a rebellion. Simultaneously, Provenzano became the target of a vendetta within Cosa Nostra, leaving him in the dangerous position of being pursued by both the Mafia and law enforcement. With few options left, Provenzano had no choice but to disappear, marking the beginning of his life as a fugitive, a life that would keep him out of public view for more than 40 years. Provenzano's burning ambition was to succeed in the city. Through their gradual takeover of the illegal meat market, Leggio, Provenzano, and the rest of the Corleone clan transitioned from their rural hometown to the capital. As an enforcer for Leggio's urban loan sharking business, Provenzano interacted with a higher class of victims. The money-lending operation evolved into a massive money laundering scheme, involving businessmen who invested money to be lent at extortionate interest rates. These investors included drug traffickers with connections to American mobsters. In the early 1960s, Palermo erupted in violent conflict over control of drug trafficking between two clans, the Greco family and the La Barberas. The fighting spilled into crowded streets and markets, even reaching other cities. Angelo La Barbera was severely wounded in a Milan shootout. In Palermo, gun battles became common in public places. The conflict reached its grisly climax with a car bomb that killed 7 policemen. An Alfa Romeo Giulietta was abandoned with a flat tire near mafia boss Salvatore Greco's villa in Ciaculli. The Carabinieri, responding to a tip-off, found a crude device on the back seat and believed they had defused it. However, when an officer opened the trunk during their search, a massive explosion occurred. The Ciaculli bomb marked a turning point, bringing the full weight of the law down on the mafia after years of impunity. Nearly 2,000 arrests were made, and Leggio was captured in 1964 after he sought refuge with 2 sisters in Corleone, one of whom had been engaged to trade unionist Placido Rizzotto, whom he had murdered back in '48. Leggio's possession of his victim's fiancée was the ultimate insult. Cesare Terranova, a courageous and diligent judge, signed an indictment against Leggio and 113 other criminals in response to the Mafia War, known as the Trial of the 114. He also oversaw the creation of a parliamentary anti-mafia commission, which delivered regular reports on organized crime. The state had finally mounted a coordinated response to mafia violence that had made parts of Sicily unlivable. After the crackdown, the mafia's ruling body disbanded and the various families went underground. Leggio ordered a cessation of all criminal activity, which reduced law enforcement pressure and allowed the mafia to regroup. Terranova's report detailed the bloody vendetta between Navarra and Leggio and showed how the Corleonesi extended their influence over Palermo and western Sicily through political contacts. They seized control of key areas ripe for development by infiltrating public, as well as private administration. The trial took place in Calabria to prevent jury tampering or corruption of magistrates. Among Leggio's protégés, Provenzano and Calogero Bugarella remained fugitives, while Toto Riina and Leoluca Bugarella faced the court. The prosecution's star witness suffered a breakdown and was later confined to a mental asylum, leading to a series of acquittals. In the following year, Leggio and 62 others were tried in Bari. Provenzano, Rufino, and Bugarella were still in hiding, but Toto Riina was again in the dock. The prosecution's case was undermined when a witness, a barber from Corleone who had seen Provenzano and others attacking Navarra's men, retracted his testimony and vanished soon after. Additionally, crucial evidence such as the shattered brake lights from Navarra's car had been tampered with. Magistrates called for life sentences for Leggio, Provenzano, and Bugarella. However, on June 10, 1969, the court acquitted them all due to insufficient evidence. The judges cited the culture of omerta as a significant barrier to proving the charges, even though a Carabinieri colonel had warned that Leggio was one of the most dangerous elements in Palermo's mafia history. Provenzano and Toto Riina continued their work for Leggio, who had secured a place on the ruling body, known as the Commission, but behaved erratically, frequently causing avoidable problems that his associates needed to fix. Evading a police manhunt, Provenzano constantly moved around western Sicily, where he found refuge among mafiosi, where the locals knew the code of silence was paramount. During the mid-1960s, Provenzano was pursued by police more intensively than at any other time in the next 25 years. His experience evading capture during this period proved invaluable when he later became Italy's most wanted man. Moving cautiously, primarily at night and staying indoors during the day, he narrowly escaped capture on several occasions. In Castronovo, a secluded town in the mountains north of Agrigento, he and his associates were ambushed by carabinieri. However, they were never caught. Meanwhile, Leggio relocated to northern Italy to pursue lucrative opportunities, and Provenzano followed suit. Milan was emerging as a significant financial hub, and as the mafia established a presence there, it earned a reputation as the New York of organized crime. These Corleonesi criminals lived in constant evasion, dodging arrest warrants and moving from place to place. Their clandestine lifestyle became one of their most intimidating characteristics. Even other mafia families were unaware of their identities or appearances. This anonymity bolstered their fearsome reputation. Their presence was only felt through the aftermath of their actions. Provenzano's enigmatic persona continued to evolve. His exact role within the mafia remained a mystery. His ability to evade capture while being implicated in numerous murders added to the mystique surrounding him. On December 10, 1969, a meeting was held late in the evening at a builder's office in Viale Lazio, the hub of new development in the western part of Palermo. Present at the meeting were Girolamo Moncada, his sons, the firm's accountant and mafia boss Michele Navarra. Navarra, suspected of instigating the mafia war by pitting families against each other, found himself marginalized by the younger generation. He had gathered a group of older capos around him, orchestrating a series of murders. Even after the mafia war ended, tensions remained high in Palermo, and Navarra was seen as a common enemy. In an attempt to escape trouble, he claimed to have drawn a map detailing the Palermo mafia families and their members, a claim that could be dangerous given the secrecy of the mafia. Meanwhile, Salvatore Greco organized a group of hitmen, led by Bernardo Provenzano, to deal with him. At 7:30 p.m. on that December evening, 2 police cars pulled up outside Moncada's office. While Toto Riina remained in one car to coordinate, 6 men disguised as police officers rushed towards the building. Bernardo Provenzano and Calogero Bugarella led the charge, followed by Damiano Caruso. Unfortunately, Caruso opened fire prematurely, losing the element of surprise. However, according to Gaetano Grotto, who turned government witness in 1999, it was Bernardo Provenzano who messed up the attack, shooting too early. A man was shot in the chest and fell, while the accountant managed to fire a shot before being hit in the stomach. Moncada's sons were also struck multiple times. Navarra took cover behind a table and returned fire, hitting Bugarella in the chest. He then shot Provenzano in the hand before diving under the desk, pretending to be dead. Provenzano, aware of Navarra's hidden map, grabbed his ankles and tried to retrieve it from his sock. Sensing resistance, Provenzano realized Navarra was still alive. As they struggled, Navarra attempted to shoot Provenzano, but his gun was empty. Provenzano's machine gun jammed, so he struck him unconscious with its butt, then shot him at close range with his handgun. The entire shootout lasted only a few minutes, resulting in 5 deaths and 108 bullets fired. Covered in blood, Provenzano carried Bugarella's body to the waiting cars and placed him in the trunk. Bugarella was secretly buried on top of another body in the Corleone cemetery. The Viale Lazio massacre became one of the most notorious events in Cosa Nostra's history. 40 years later, the trial of its alleged perpetrators would still be ongoing. In the beginning, there was opposition to the Palermo family's forceful elimination of Navarra. However, the other clans no longer had the will to fight, allowing the Grecos and their ambitious allies, the Corleonesi, to consolidate their power. Bernardo Provenzano's reputation for tenacity was confirmed, along with his nickname Il Trattore, or rather the Tractor, which symbolized how his presence left an indelible mark, likened to grass never growing again where he had been. He was viewed as unstoppable, persistent, and fiercely resolute. After being acquitted in Bari, Leggio spent much of his time receiving medical treatment in clinics in northern Italy. In December 1970, the appeals court sentenced him to life in prison for the double murder of Dr. Navarra and his colleague, but he was already missing by then. In his absence, Toto Riina represented him on Cosa Nostra's ruling commission, along with Gaetano Badalamenti of Cinisi and Stefano Bontate, known as the Prince of Villagrazia. However, it would not be long before Toto Riina would eliminate or forcefully oust his fellow commission members. Rina and Provenzano aimed for power in the city, and circumstances favored them. Despite kidnapping being outlawed, the Corleonesi carried out abductions, bringing in large ransoms and causing significant embarrassment. Antonino Calderone, a future pentito, saw the Corleonesi as a new kind of mafioso. Rina, with Provenzano's support, took over from Leggio. Provenzano shifted from a ruthless killer to a political player. In 1970, Provenzano and Rina had ties to public office through proxies like Vito Ciancimino, a corrupt figure with significant political influence in Palermo. The Commissioner for Public Works, Vito Ciancimino, was the ambitious son of a Corleone barber. Accused repeatedly of mafia connections, he simply claimed they were unavoidable in Sicily. His close ties with Palermo's powerful La Barbera brothers and the Salvo cousins, who handled Sicily's tax collection with mafia support, brought long-term corruption to the city, which went hand in hand with his alliance to the Christian Democrat mayor of Palermo, Salvatore Lima. From 1959 to 1963, over half of the 4,000 building licenses issued went to 3 inexperienced individuals, mere frontmen for developers paying substantial kickbacks to the mafia. These developments destroyed green spaces and citrus groves, while Cosa Nostra laundered millions in drug money through the builders' books. Despite his power, Ciancimino was controlled by the Corleone Mafia. Tommaso Buscetta stated that Ciancimino was under the influence of the Corleonesi, particularly that of Bernardo Provenzano and Toto Rina. Provenzano's close ties with Ciancimino bolstered his standing within the organization, a relationship he guarded fiercely. Ciancimino remained a crucial behind-the-scenes contact throughout Provenzano's ascent to power. Giovanni Falcone described Ciancimino as the most political of the mafiosi and the most mafioso of the politicians. Even after his expulsion from the Christian Democrats for mafia connections, Ciancimino retained substantial influence due to his ability to deliver the mafia vote. Provenzano managed his abrasive personality with diplomatic skill, whereas Rina and Ciancimino couldn't tolerate each other, a sentiment shared mutually. Ciancimino once confided in Giovanni Brusca that he couldn't deal with Rina. Ciancimino's tenure as mayor of Palermo in 1970 ended in scandal due to his mafia ties, forcing him to resign within months. He then worked more quietly behind the scenes, maintaining a patronage system to secure jobs for individuals in public office while they were in prison. During this time, Cosa Nostra's power grew significantly, fueled by drug money. In 1974, Luciano Leggio was arrested in Milan, where he lived under an assumed name with his partner and their young son. After years of evading capture and manipulating trials, he would never leave prison alive. However, Leggio had already delegated executive power to Rina and Provenzano, but continued to guide them from behind bars. He appointed them as joint leaders of the Corleone family, alternating leadership every 2 years. Consequently, Rina's ambition led him to take the first turn and never relinquish control. This arrangement appeared to suit Provenzano well. The contrasting styles of the joint leaders became increasingly evident, while Provenzano preferred to operate discreetly, quietly expanding his influence. Rina mirrored Leggio's unpredictable violence, leading with a blend of cunning, ferocity, and ruthlessness. Rina's co-leaders on the commission, Badalamenti and Bontate, were unprepared for his ruthless tactics. In 1975, Rina demonstrated his brutal approach by kidnapping and murdering the father-in-law of Nino Salvo, one of Bontate's most valuable and prestigious contacts. Rina deepened the insult by refusing to return the body, denying any involvement in the crime. Meanwhile, Provenzano remained in the background, honing his political connections and skills as a mediator. His subtle, thoughtful approach didn't win over mafiosi, who favored more direct, aggressive methods. While Rina amassed millions from the drug trade, Provenzano focused on less glamorous but steady sources of income like sewage and garbage contracts. He preferred these public contracts as they were lower risk, useful for laundering money, and effective in solidifying territorial control. Badalamenti, the affluent boss of Cinisi and head of the commission, had become wealthy from drug trafficking and kickbacks from the construction of the new Punta Raisi airport. The Corleonesi used his accumulated drug wealth as a pretext to expel him from Cosa Nostra, swiftly eliminating one of their most powerful rivals. A contemporary figure who provided insight into the Corleonesi's rise to power was Gioacchino Pennino, a well-regarded doctor and mafioso involved in Palermo's politics. Pennino disclosed that Provenzano wielded influence from behind the scenes and was the first to reveal Provenzano's nickname, Il Ragioniere, highlighting how deeply he had infiltrated various spheres of power. Investigative journalist Mario Francesi began to uncover how the Corleonesi were controlling public contracts through their connections with politicians and businessmen. He described a third level of the mafia, bosses who operated from behind desks in public offices, manipulating government functions to serve their interests. Before he could delve further, Francesi was assassinated near his home on January 26, 1979. Ugo Triolo, a magistrate in Prizzi, just south of Corleone, refused to tolerate the overbearing demands of the mafiosi and threw them out of his office. Rina and Provenzano, trained by Leggio in terror and intimidation, wouldn't tolerate such defiance. In their first killing of a state official, they brazenly shot Triolo in the middle of Corleone and left his body in the street outside his home. Towards the late 1970s, they appointed Michele Greco as the head of the commission. According to Tommaso Buscetta, Greco was too ineffectual to be anything more than a figurehead, masking the Corleoneses' ascent to power. At a mafiosi meeting in Palermo, Provenzano and Rina revealed their plan to assassinate retired police colonel Giuseppe Russo, a relentless investigator who had been a thorn in their side. The proposal was immediately opposed by Giuseppe Di Cristina, who adhered to Cosa Nostra's principle of not targeting state officials. After the murder of Russo on August 20, 1977, Rina and Provenzano informed Leggio of Di Cristina's resistance, leading to Di Cristina being murdered on May 30, 1978. Any investigator who came too close to uncovering the Corleoneses' drug operations was swiftly eliminated. Boris Giuliano, who was tracking drug money between Italy and the United States, was gunned down at a bar near his home on July 21, 1979. Just a few months later, on September 25, 1979, Cesare Terranova, notable for his anti-mafia stance, and his bodyguard were shot to death outside his home in Palermo. Piersanti Mattarella, the president of the regional government of Sicily, and a Christian Democrat committed to resisting the mafia's influence, attempted to halt the corrupt allocation of government contracts. On January 6, 1980, he was assassinated for his efforts. By openly attacking the state, Rina and Provenzano aimed to intimidate not just the authorities, but also their rival mafia families in Palermo. The first major casualty was Stefano Bontate, and just 2 weeks later, on May 11, 1981, Salvatore Inzerillo was also shot and killed. In the ensuing chaos, fearful individuals attempted to secure favor with Rina and Provenzano by betraying their own families. However, Rina was distrustful of everyone, leading him to eliminate over 200 suspected associates of the defeated factions, either by making them disappear, strangling, or shooting them. The Inzerillo family was either killed or forced into exile, with many seeking refuge in the United States with the Gambino crime family. The Corleoneses' vendetta continued even abroad, resulting in the death of Inzerillo's brother in the United States. Rina eventually decreed that those who left Sicily could live, but they were banned from ever returning. On May 1, 1982, Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa was appointed prefect of Palermo to address the violence of the Second Mafia War which ensued. However, he was assassinated on September 3, 1982, on orders from Salvatore Rina. Rocco Chinnici, who succeeded Terranova, took a firm stance against the mafia. Energetic and ambitious, Chinnici launched a comprehensive investigation into the mafia's finances. He issued arrest warrants for Palermo boss Michele Greco, Rina, and Provenzano in connection with Dalla Chiesa's murder. On July 29, 1983, Chinnici and 2 of his bodyguards were killed in a car bomb explosion in Palermo. In a police-recorded conversation, Giuseppe Greco one of the Corleoneses' most ruthless and prolific killers, explicitly stated that the assassination of Carlo Alberto dalla Chiesa was orchestrated by Provenzano. After eliminating his rivals and showing the extent of Cosa Nostra's power against state opposition, Rinna completed his violent takeover by appointing Provenzano as the capo mandamento, or district chief, of Corleone. While Rinna waged war in Palermo, Provenzano, still at large since 1963, focused on business, making Bugarella his base. Whenever danger loomed, he was quickly moved to another safe house in the area. During this time, he used his contacts in the health sector to arrange discreet transportation to meetings, often traveling in an ambulance. He was also seen in a white Mercedes driven by the young Giovanni Brusca. At the prosecutor's office, investigators were following the paper trail linked to Provenzano's network of companies. By tracing connections between board members and investors, they discovered several companies located on the same street in Palermo. Many of these led to Pino Lipari, a former surveyor and consultant for the National Road Transport Corporation. Despite having no criminal record or obvious ties to Cosa Nostra, Lipari emerged as one of Provenzano's most trusted associates and a key player in his business interests. Together, they siphoned off a fortune from state funds, establishing a new financial foundation for the Mafia. After the Mafia War, the Corleonesi faction led by Rinna and Provenzano emerged as the dominant force. However, their leadership styles and visions began to diverge more sharply. Rinna, who had never allowed Provenzano to take his designated turn as leader, as per Leggio's instructions, grew increasingly intolerant of any opposition. When Provenzano disagreed with him, he had to use all his tact and cunning to avoid provoking Rinna's anger. Giovanni Brusca recounted an incident that highlighted the contrast between the two. Two individuals needed to be dealt with. At a meeting, Rinna wanted them eliminated on the spot, but Provenzano suggested letting them go and reconsidering the situation later. Rinna, asserting his authority, insisted that his decision be followed. Throughout the 1970s, the two bosses, Toto Rinna and Provenzano, were frequently seen together at meetings. However, after the Mafia War, Rinna typically attended commission meetings alone. According to the Pentito Salvatore Concemi, Provenzano continued to be involved in commission meetings during the 1980s, but Toto Rinna disagreed with Provenzano's approach, whether it was the way he ran the meetings, the agreements he made, or the topics he brought up. To manage this, Rinna and Provenzano reached an understanding. They would first meet privately to agree on a unified stance, which Rinna would then present as their collective position. Rinna's cunning and descent into madness led to the killing and disappearance of many of his most trusted hitmen by their own comrades. Among those murdered were Giuseppe the Shoe Greco and Filippo Marchesi. During this period, Rinna is said to have even considered eliminating Provenzano. However, discontent brewed among some members of Cosa Nostra, who were horrified by the direction the organization was taking and sought revenge against the Corleonesi by exposing its secrets. Nino Calderone, whose brother Pippo, the capo of Catania, had been murdered, decided to collaborate with anti-mafia prosecutor Giovanni Falcone in the spring of 1987. When Francesco Marino Manoia began revealing the Corleoneses' methods, Rinna responded by brutally murdering Manoia's mother, aunt, and sister. Meanwhile, Provenzano built a loyal group of moderates around him. According to the turncoat Antonino Giuffri, there was a proposal to break away from the Corleonesi and start anew, but Provenzano opposed it. As dissatisfaction within Cosa Nostra grew, Provenzano remained patient, quietly devising his own strategy. In 1992, the new measures implemented by Falcone created a crisis among imprisoned mafiosi. They could no longer expect quick releases or the assurance that their fortunes would remain intact upon getting out. Rinna escalated the situation by declaring an all-out war on the state. Provenzano, however, sought to distance himself from the impending chaos, as he harbored deep concerns about Rinna's aggressive strategy. Anticipating a disastrous period for Cosa Nostra, he planned to disappear from the scene. Giovanni Brusca, was given the task of killing Falcone. Rinna, aiming to make a bold statement of mafia power, insisted that the assassination take place in Sicily, specifically on Highway A29, which Falcone used to travel from the airport to his home during his weekly visits. According to Antonino Di Matteo, if Provenzano had opposed the bombings, he wouldn't have remained passive. Instead, he would have taken action. However, the bombings were likely advantageous for him at the time. On May 23, 1992, Giovanni Brusca remotely detonated a bomb from a small outbuilding on a hill beside Highway A29. The explosion killed Giovanni Falcone, his wife Francesca, and 3 police officers. Following Falcone's death, Paolo Borsellino took over his position at the Palermo prosecutor's office. On July 19, 1992, Borsellino and 5 of his bodyguards were killed in a massive car bomb explosion. The city erupted in anger and outrage over the mafia's brutality and the state's failure to protect its citizens. The increasing number of prisoners agreeing to testify against the mafia signaled growing internal unrest within Cosa Nostra. Mafiosi who had opposed Rinna's tactics and witnessed the aftermath of the early 80s conflict chose to cooperate with authorities rather than face his wrath. Salvatore Concemi, who had been involved in the Giovanni Falcone bombing, walked into a carabinieri station and declared his willingness to cooperate. He urged other mafiosi to do the same, denouncing Rinna, saying, "He is a dog, a demon, a devil who has destroyed Cosa Nostra." Following the bombings, Rinna, confident he had captured the government's attention, sought to pressure them into negotiations. He reportedly compiled a list of demands, threatening further bombings if they were not met. At 8:15 on January 15, 1993, a car caught in a traffic jam on a Palermo street was stopped. The man taken into custody was none other than Salvatore Toto Rinna. Following Rinna's arrest, numerous conspiracy theories emerged. Giovanni Brusca suggested 2 primary suspects, Baldassare Di Maggio and Bernardo Provenzano. Initial suspicions of a possible deal were fueled when the mafia swiftly evacuated Rinna's opulent villa on Via Bernini in Palermo after his capture. On April 1, 1993, just 2.5 months after Rinna's arrest, a high-level meeting of Cosa Nostra's capos took place to discuss their next steps. Leoluca Bugarella, who had been appointed by Rinna, argued for continuing their violent strategy. On May 27, 1993, a bomb exploded in Florence, killing 5 people and injuring 40. Another bomb detonated in Milan in July, claiming 5 lives. Later that month, 2 bombs went off near San Giovanni in Laterano in Rome, injuring 3 and causing damage to the cathedral. In September, Padre Puglisi, a priest known for his anti-mafia activism, was murdered outside his home in Palermo. In the fall of 1993, Bugarella ordered the kidnapping of Santino Di Matteo's son. Di Matteo, who had been involved in the murder of anti-mafia judge Giovanni Falcone and had become a government witness on June 4, 1993, was targeted for his cooperation with authorities. It would be later discovered that after 779 days of captivity, during which the boy suffered severe mistreatment, he was strangled on January 11, 1996, and his body was dissolved in acid. Provenzano had been maintaining a low profile, steering clear of major meetings and avoiding direct conflict with Bugarella. Despite numerous reports of his death, Provenzano felt it was time to assert control over the organization. In April 1994, he sent a letter to the Palermo prosecutor's office, which arrived 2 days later. Although the letter only announced the appointment of his legal representatives, the widespread media coverage made its underlying message clear. For Cosa Nostra members, Provenzano's letter was definitive proof that he was alive and not the phantom many believed him to be. Provenzano's influence was growing as people increasingly sought his recommendations and assurances. Those who had endured long prison sentences due to Rinna's brutal tactics began to align themselves with Provenzano upon their release. Despite accusations that he might have had a role in Rinna's arrest, these did not deter his supporters. Provenzano was less directly linked to the bombings than Rinna, which helped him attract a more moderate faction within Cosa Nostra. In November 1994, a faction loyal to Provenzano executed one of Leoluca Bugarella's supporters. Bugarella retaliated with a spate of brutal killings in Villabate. However, on June 24, 1995, Bugarella was apprehended near his Palermo apartment. With Bugarella out of the way, Provenzano was free to act. Almost immediately, and with the authorities inadvertently assisting by arresting many of Bugarella's loyalists, Provenzano began consolidating his control over Palermo. By this point, tensions between Provenzano's faction and those loyal to Rinna had reached a breaking point. Brusca, fearing that Provenzano might have him assassinated, was terrified of attending meetings with him. Nevertheless, Brusca eventually aligned himself with Provenzano. Provenzano's path was now clear. Anyone obstructing his ascent to the leadership of Cosa Nostra had been either removed, imprisoned, or brought under his influence. In October 2003, Provenzano was covertly transported to France, reportedly by Salvatore Troia, a mobster from Villabate, to undergo prostate surgery at a private clinic near Marseille. He used fake travel and medical documents under the name of Gaspare Troia, Salvatore's father, who was a Sicilian baker. On January 25, 2005, police conducted a series of raids across Sicily, arresting 46 mafia suspects believed to be aiding Bernardo Provenzano in evading capture. Although Provenzano himself was not apprehended, investigators found evidence proving that the 72-year-old boss was still alive and actively controlling the mafia. This evidence came in the form of his distinctive handwritten notes, which he used to communicate with his subordinates. 2 months later, another raid led to the arrest of over 80 mafiosi, but once again Provenzano managed to avoid capture. Luciano Leggio once said, "Provenzano shoots like a god. Shame he has the brains of a chicken." However, he lived 43 years as a fugitive before he was finally captured on April 11, 2006, by the Italian police near his hometown of Corleone. After his arrest, Bernardo Provenzano was detained at the maximum security prison in Terni and subjected to the harsh conditions of the Article 41 bis prison regime. A year later, he was transferred to a prison in Novara, where he attempted several times to continue communicating through his signature handwritten notes. Ultimately, Provenzano faced a staggering 20 life sentences, an additional 49 years and 1 month, and was condemned to solitary confinement for 33 years and 6 months. On March 19, 2011, it was disclosed that Provenzano was suffering from bladder cancer, prompting his transfer from Novara to a prison in Parma. On May 9, 2012, he attempted suicide by trying to suffocate himself with a plastic bag, but the attempt was thwarted by a prison guard. His lawyers argued if it was an attempted suicide or something else. Provenzano eventually succumbed to complications from bladder cancer on July 13, 2016, at the age of 83, at San Paolo Hospital in Milan. He was denied a public funeral by both the church and the Palermo police chief, and was subsequently cremated in Milan.